begin with, if you can tell us a bit about yourself and some of the work that you're doing related to artificial intelligence and journalism.
All right. Thank you for having me, Prof. Kwala. Well, my background is in journalism. I practiced journalism, I think, for about 10 years, then later on transitioned into academia, where I started teaching journalism at Cape Peninsula University and later on moved to Birmingham City University in the UK. Um, what I think my main research interest is in the intersection of technology and society, technology and journalism, and technology assisted activism. So I would say the past 5 years, I have edited a book on how technology is reconfiguring journalism practice, but that volume was specifically focusing on these new media affordances like social media and digital applications and how they are being integrated into traditional journalism practice.
Well, that sounds like very interesting work, and we look forward to seeing the volumes when they are published. I'm sure the issue of media freedom and journalism and integrity comes through in some of the chapters within these volumes. So, what would you say from this work that you're doing appears to be the most significant opportunity? And what are some of the most pressing red flags you see when it comes to AI and press freedom?
Well, I think one of the challenges associated with AI and press freedom is that the AI will intensify this blurring of the lines between an amateur journalist and a normative, journalist as we know them, people who are trained or are professional journalists, right? And we know that a lot of challenges that journalists have been facing is issues around credibility, in part because when audiences see news, they assume that this news is coming from professional journalists, right? And that's why you see a lot of attacks that happens on journalists. In most cases, information doesn't originate from professional journalists. It originates from people who are good with using social media affordances and make up stuff, what we now call fake news, etc. So we know that journalists over the past few years have been facing attacks in part because of this blurring of the lines that is made possible by digital affordances. Anybody can just wake up and claim to be a journalist, right? So that's the one element of it. Now AI amplifies the possibility of people who are not professional journalists to do the kind of work that journalists do, maybe even more, because they don't have, if you are an amateur, you're not bound by any ethical code or you don't ascribe to any, right? That means you can make up stuff, you can write without checks and balances, unlike what we do in a proper newsroom.
Do you see any opportunities from these technologies for press freedom?
There's no doubt that the instrumentalization of generative AI is going to empower journalists to do their work much easier and with a lot of freedom. Um, But also, while there's still problems with these large language models, I think there's a study that was done by the Tau Center recently that found that 60% of the time, these models do make mistakes. If you ask them a question, 60% of the times they make mistakes. But I think there's that 40% chance that journalists can leverage these technologies in doing their jobs. And I'm making this point because I think the bigger percentage tells us that there's still a lot of things to worry about these technologies.
You are looking at ethics specifically in one of the volumes. Do you have any views on how we can ensure that AI serves democracy and preserves access to credible information, and in so doing empowers citizens?
I think you already see that AI is being used the same way we use a lot of these search engines. So that
Mhm.
means it's easier for citizens to access information much quicker than they would if they have to go through a lot of search engine to find some pieces of information. So to that extent, I think AI is likely to empower citizens to get, credible some information at a much faster speed than they would if they are going through other search engines, like Google or Google Scholar, etc. So I think that's one avenue that I'm thinking that AI can be used to leverage issues of democracy, democratic participation, but also having an idea around understanding what's happening within society. But I mean, I have to go back to the challenge that still exists with these AI models, that they are not yet very accurate. I think I've already mentioned that 60% of the time they make mistakes, which means if we have to rely on the output from this model, we have to factor in some of the downside of these models at the present moment. In fact, some of the studies actually mention that only those highly subscribed or models with high subscriptions are better than those ones for free, right? So if you are using ChatGPT that is for free, you'll probably get less credibility or credible information than if you are using ChatGPT that is high subscription amounts. But I think we also have to remember that in when you participate in these models, right? When you search for stuff, when you feed some of the information to this model, you're also participating in involuntarily giving away part of your private information, right? If you load your CV right now, Prof. Nkwala, into one of these models and say, help me improve, right? You don't have guarantees that that information you have saved will remain private. So that one becomes another secondary challenge, that the more you are integrated to these models, the more and more of your private information is going to be seeded into these platform economies or platform companies. It could be OpenAI, it could be DeepSeek, it could be Bard or whatever, some of these models that we already see, or Claude AI, right? So that becomes another challenge, right? There are no guarantees around issues of transparency. Um, in comparison to other platforms, when you look for information, you either have to supply your credentials, and then there are also some guarantees that this information is not going to be abused. But that's different with these AI models. The moment you participate into the ecosystem, you're also involuntarily giving away part of your privacy. And we know that this might be a challenge, considering also the retreat or democratic retreat that we are seeing from the platform companies. I think you've already seen that a lot of these platform companies no longer care about private information, private freedoms. They're even in US, they're even asking the Trump administration to allow them to comb through people's private data to build models.
Just back to journalists particularly, what skills would you say they need to be able to navigate this changing ecosystem, as you've said, and maybe even the public as well? What are some of the survival skills that are needed?
Um, First, I think the entry-level skill that journalists need is working around prompts. So, some people call it prompt engineering, right? You need to know how to ask right questions from AI so that you're able to extract right answers. Um, but also, I think you also need some of the technical skills, so that you know how to operate you know how to use AI with its capabilities and limitation. So you need to know how to use AI for things like data analysis, or conducting research. You probably also need to know how to use AI to do some evaluation of generated insights or prediction. So you ask AI, then it makes some predictions, right? So you need to be able to analyze some of this kind of data, because the challenge is that if you use any information that you are given with AI without a critical eye, you might end up being participating in spreading misinformation, because we know these models do hallucinate. And because they do hallucinate, if you are not careful, you might end up rehashing misinformation or rehashing biases that are embedded in the data set, right? And obviously, you also might need ability to make ethical decisions, right? Because we already know that the forte that we are operating in now doesn't have enough ethical guardrails. So we are still trying to develop ethical codes around integrating AI into our everyday practices. So I think a journalist need to know how to make ethical decisions when you are using artificial intelligence.